To understand what we're going through right now, we have to understand the past. So before we keep going forward, I want you to give us a history lesson because the stolen election of 1876 brought us to the brink of a second civil war. Those who refuse to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. Can you explain how the stolen election of 1876 is a warning from the past?
Yeah, it's a period of time in history when the original drain the swamp candidate was Samuel J. Tilden. He was a Northern Democrat, but he was known as an honest millionaire who got all his money, really just by being exceptional at business. And he got known politically because he was coming against all the corruption and fraud. The nation was still bitterly divided. It was still trying to heal from the impact of the Civil War, but very little healing had taken place. The South was still utterly devastated and crushed, and all the money that was released in Reconstruction, 93% of it went back to a few small monopolistic barons that had basically underwritten from the Northern side the Civil War. The South only got 7% of the money. So there was a ton of hatred towards the inequality of what was going on. Um, they had just experienced a financial crisis in 1873 that had just rocked the foundations of everyone and left perhaps, almost 30% of the people at one time in unemployment. I mean, so when you look at what's going on today, we're a nation that's bitterly divided. We have corruption scandals kind of all over the place. Where they back in 1876 they had some shootings of some black folks that basically sparked racial riots. The South was in real turmoil, and we had an inept government that was run by some greedy politicians who were pilfering the public treasury, that financial crisis spawning fear and growing despair. And the real power rested in a few small monopolistic companies that were becoming fantastically wealthy at everyone else's expense. And so, do you hear and see any parallels to what's going on today? I mean, I look at that, and we have the similar same conditions. What happened in that election is it was absolutely excruciatingly close, and when they had gotten done with the counting on that night, both men had kind of gone to bed thinking that they had won. But the reality was there were four states that were still in contention, all of whom had returned several different electoral returns because they had dueling state governments that were still the unresolved effects of the Civil War. So no one knew whose returns they could apply, and the Republicans in the South were in charge of the electoral machines, and they had done some fraudulent counting that was being declared. But the South had also mobilized, sort of their military troops to suppress the Negroes from voting. And so it's like, whose returns are the more honest? And the answer was neither. And so nobody really knew how to resolve this. It took 4 months before this was resolved. I know everyone's wanting this election to be solved, but back then it was of such a significant consequence. But it took 4 months to finally get resolved. It was decided at the end of the day by a single vote from one of the Supreme Court justices. And what was so tragic is the entire nation had voted across party lines, perhaps for the first time in a long time of their elections, and they voted to bring an end to corruption. Tilden actually won the election by well over 300,000 votes, which is a good 5 or 6% of the total at the time. And so you look at that and you're going like, he clearly won. It was hung up in the Electoral College. But the party bosses, the establishment, political powers, they were not going to let that just happen. The whole nation was afraid that they would fall into civil war because the South was saying, if we don't get our man, we're going to war. And the North was saying that if the Democrats were able to get in power, it would be undoing everything that the Civil War was about. And so everybody was threatening violence and basically a return to hostilities. And America sat by watching this election be stolen before their very eyes, being agreed upon in a backroom, smoky backroom deal, where the South agreed to let the Republicans have the presidency if they would be given the South back. They wanted control of the South, and the Republicans agreed. And what happened was the black people, the black race basically got betrayed. They were left without the federal troops that were there to protect them. That's when the Jim Crow laws came in. That's when the lynchings began. And that's when the ugly history of white supremacy really took over this country until almost about 1920. And it kind of took until 1960 before we really saw the needed civil rights reform happen again. And so when people are trying to understand the pains of what's going on today, it's in that election that the proverbial script got flipped on the two parties. The Republican Party was begun as the party to basically stop slavery. It was the abolition party. And they were fighting for that little guy and fighting according to conscience. After the Civil War, they became the party of big business, and they were ruled by those industrial, monopolies of the North that had won the Civil War. The South was reduced to a bunch of these small peasant farmers, and they became the party of the little guy because they had basically lost their power. And that's what we've inherited today. And it's where the black people basically felt deeply betrayed by the Republican Party. And then later, when Roosevelt started handing out money, they basically bought the black vote, and they've been Democrats ever since. This election, what's so amazing is this is the first election in a long time that people crossed party votes profoundly. And Trump got more minority votes than the history of any Republican ever. And he also surprisingly won the white suburban college-educated woman vote, which they said he couldn't possibly have, but he won that. So it's amazing how that election got hung up. It took 4 months to get resolved. And I sat there going, like, if everybody knew that it was fraud and it was being stolen, why did they let it happen? So what are the real lessons for us today? America voted. The powers that be were going to continue the corruption. Corruption won, and America lost. And it's because the people forgot that they were the sovereign, and they accepted it because they were afraid that hostilities would break out. And I think we're kind of in a very similar, profound space today, where it's like if we as a people don't look at what's being happening in front of us and basically say, no, that's not okay. We need free and fair elections. As much as I am for Trump, I don't want to fight for a man and for a party, because the greater element that's at stake right now is I want to fight for truth and justice to still be possible in America. If this election goes over and with all the fraud that's not examined and it's allowed to continue, you will have so many people that will have lost confidence that we even have a system that works. And I think that's a more tragic end. As much as I do believe that, I can look at this election and I can see it as, right and wrong. I don't know that it's just so clear that it's right and left. I mean, it's like half of our nation, I'd love to say, could see this clearly. But the truth is we ended up with a very divided nation. And I don't think America works when one side imposes its will on the other. If we don't learn to somehow become we the people and figure out how to resolve those things in a way that really is satisfying for everybody, we're going to end up in perpetual civil war.